Today we are going to read another passage and look at examples of figurative language. And so this is Grace's canoe trip. I will read it first. The bright sun gazes down on Grace and her family as they canoe through the calm, crystal clear waters of Gray Lake. The paddles, looking tired and worn out from their long day, slowly push the water back, causing them to drift forward with each stroke. The huge Arkansas sun bakes their skin like cookies in an oven. Grace's mind is an ocean of places she would rather be when she notices a splashing sound in the distance. Suddenly, Grace and her family stumble upon an immense waterfall. Grace wonders if Niagara Falls could possibly be as beautiful as this waterfall. Within a sudden burst of energy, Grace paddles at the speed of light, and she is on cloud 9 as she approaches the waterfall that must stretch upwards for 100 miles. All right, boys and girls. So again, I'm asking you to find examples of figurative language in a passage. And so hopefully you've already made one attempt at doing this. So an example of alliteration that I found in this passage, if you could pause at this time and see if you can, again, find an example of alliteration. Okay, hopefully you pause the video at this time. And my example that I found was calm, crystal clear waters of Gray Lake. So the calm, crystal clear would be an example of alliteration, that repetition of the consonant sound. An example of an idiom that I found. So last time that we did this, I didn't go into the example of the idiom because it was new information. But today, I want you to pause and see if you can find the example of an idiom in this passage. Okay, hopefully you took the time to find the example of the idiom. This one's a bit trickier, and so I'm definitely going to point it out. So the example is on cloud 9 in this last sentence. She is on cloud 9 as she approaches the waterfall that must stretch upwards for 100 miles. So there's your example of an idiom. Going back to the top of my page, let's see if we can find an example of personification. So this passage mentions that there are two. That's what the two represents here next to personification. So again, personification is that non-human, pardon me, my phone went off, non-human quality given to something that isn't human. And so, or excuse me, that non-human taking on a human quality. And so one example is the bright sun gazes down at Grace and her family. And so gazes, obviously the sun is gazing, and so that would be one example of personification. The other example of personification is the paddles looking tired and worn out. And so the paddles looking tired and worn out is another example of personification. All right. Now I'm also asking you to find an example of a simile and a metaphor. And so remember, similes are comparisons using like or as. So one example of simile, at this time, if you want to pause to see if you can find it on your own, please do. Okay, the example of a simile would be the huge Arkansas sun bakes their skin like cookies in an oven. That like in the sentence gives me an alert that this is a simile. And so there's your example of a simile. And finally, see if you can pause to find a metaphor in this passage. Okay, hopefully you came up with a metaphor for this passage. I apologize for pausing it there. So we were talking about metaphors. So a metaphor in this passage, hopefully you were able to pick that out. And so here, where my cursor is, Grace's mind is an ocean of places she would rather be. So Grace's mind is, again, is telling me that I'm comparing, and the is going to make this a metaphor. And so Grace's mind is an ocean. I'm saying something is. And so in this case, mind is an ocean. Okay, so again, there are a few additional figurative language examples in this passage. If you're familiar with them, you're more than welcome to share those with me as well. I hope that this gives you a good idea of how to do your work for today. Thank you, boys and girls, for listening.